It is a really great pleasure to be here for this conversation tonight, for more than one reason. I'm, number one, massive sports fan, but fundamentally, sports is really important as something that knits our community together and strengthens the fabric of our community and our society, and does the opposite when not done well. But it's also massively important to our economy, and we were talking about the upcoming World Cup, Women's World Cup. Wow, going to be amazing. A huge shot on the arm for our economy, but also just a real opportunity to see amazing women performing their special feats on the field. So it's really, really important, and sport is also a really important driver of social change. When we get that right. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's great to have tonight's event sponsored by CEDA members, Deakin University. For those of you who don't know much about CEDA members, they're at the core of everything we do. They work with us to shape conversations that shape our nation. So it's really great to be able to put on events with our member partners and to have them helping us drive the conversations that we think are really important to our future. What else have I got to do? I think that's all. I'm going to introduce the person who is going to drive the bus. You've got an opportunity today to really engage in the conversation, so please do so. You're going to hear from some amazing people, but we're going to have a really great conversation if you guys jump in as well. So please, once the opportunity presents itself, feel free to ask whatever questions you think are relevant, and I'm sure the panel is going to give you the frank and fearless response. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Katie Rowe, who is going to steward everything else from here on in. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda, and welcome everyone on this frosty Melbourne evening. It is a bit chilly, so thanks for being here, and we've all got our jackets on the panel, so we'll stay warm and hopefully give you some good content to engage with this evening. So this is a really important discussion about advancing opportunities and levelling the playing field for women in sport. So my name is Katie Rowe, as we mentioned, and I'm an Associate Professor at Deakin University. I conduct sport research that focuses predominantly on women in sport, from a sport management perspective, looking at participation and leadership in particular for women in sport. And I'm representing the major partner tonight, Deakin University, and Deakin has obviously a commitment to this event, and is a long-standing supporter of women in sport in various ways. We have a number of women's sport partnerships which are critical, that flow across netball, AFL, basketball and cycling, providing key resources to support women to advance their careers in sport in many different ways. We also have a strength in research around women's sport as well. Our research generates insights and evidence which shapes women's sport. For example, through 3 recently received grants, Deakin researchers are examining issues such as anti-racism efforts to support women and girls in sport, exploring approaches to gender diversity management in community sport, and male allyship for women sport coaches. These projects have all been wonderfully funded by the Victorian Government Office for Women in Sport and Recreation. And through this research, my colleagues and I hope to advance evidence and provide insights to inform policies and strategies into the future. As Australia prepares to host the FIFA Women's World Cup next month, it's the perfect time to be shining a light on these important issues today around the need to close the opportunity gap, which currently sees women in sport battling to be seen, heard and valued. The gender pay gap in sport is substantial. While progress is being made, it's incremental, and most women athletes need to supplement their income with other forms of paid work beyond sport. Women's sport receives a fraction of airtime of men's sport. Women athletes are susceptible to maltreatment and abuse, and we know that pregnancy during a professional sporting career is far from the accepted and universal norm in sport, which are all key issues facing women as they advance their professional careers. In a documentary called Sidelined, which aired on SBS recently, it followed the Deakin Melbourne Boomers through their 2022 WNBL Championship season, and it really highlighted a lot of these different issues up close and personal with these athletes. We saw countless stories of women athletes juggling full-time work while pursuing a professional basketball career. We heard the Opal's captain, Tess Madgen, reflect on how it had taken her 12 seasons to earn the same amount of money through her basketball professional career as her brother had earned playing for Collingwood in just 4 seasons prior to his exit from the club. Kayla George reflected, who's the Boomers captain, on needing to play 12 consecutive years around the world in different leagues without having a single off-season to recover her body. You can imagine the challenges that presents. We've also seen in the Matildas documentary recently some similar stories: lack of exposure, media coverage, limited income potential, and challenges for players as they strive to make their way to the top and forge a professional career in sport. Women across every sport are fighting to be seen, heard and valued, and to be given the opportunities that they deserve to play and enjoy sport and to pursue a meaningful career as a professional athlete. Sadly, the gender divide in sport starts early, with young girls and their families fighting for opportunities to access facilities, supportive cultures and the resources they need to enjoy playing sport. With the Women's World Cup just around the corner and our Matildas in red-hot form, this event has the potential to transform not only football, but sport in Australia. It's a massive global phenomenon, and we hope that the impacts will ripple widely through sport and the Australian community. But we can't just assume that major sport events like the Women's World Cup will have lasting positive impacts. We have to harness those potential impacts. Major events provide rare opportunities to amplify key messages and drive systemic change. But this change takes strategic planning, thinking and collaboration over an extended period of time. We need to lean in and commit to that change over time through this event. To better understand how the Women's World Cup is being leveraged positively to positively impact sport for women and girls in Australia, I'm currently supervising a postdoctoral research fellow to examine various aspects of women's sport benefits that are leveraged through the Women's World Cup, and so the legacy management across Australia and New Zealand. We need a greater level of investment in research more broadly. So we need to identify and expand on our knowledge in women's sport. We've seen way too much investment and focus on men's sport and prioritising understanding how men's bodies works and men's bodies work, and really dedicating all of our research attention to the male default status. We need to change that. We need to invest and focus more of our knowledge generation on our women athletes and on women's sport. I suspect those of us in the room here tonight want to see change in sport and advance conditions and opportunities for women. I hope that we leave this evening with a set of insights and ideas that we can use to drive change to advance opportunities for women and girls. And so to help explore those opportunities to close the gaps, to help us explore ways to close the opportunity gap for women in sport, I'd like to invite our incredible panel. We're very fortunate to have some wonderful speakers this evening. So our first speaker, I'm just half tempted to sit. I'm not sure if we'll sit just quite yet, but I'll invite the panel up and then I'll take my seat. Our first speaker is Rebecca McCloy. Rebecca has responsibility for sport acquisition strategy and its content, channel and commercial partnerships across Kayo, Fox Sports and Foxtel. She's an experienced and highly respected media executive with over 18 years of experience in sports broadcasting, media rights negotiation and strategy. And she's a leading voice in the promotion of investment in women's sport. So welcome, Rebecca. Our next guest is Sarah Stiles. I'll hop out of the way actually, and then you can walk past. We'll invite Sarah up to the stage. So Sarah is the Director for the Victorian Office for Women in Sport and Recreation, the only dedicated office of its kind in Australia. Her and her team are charged with levelling the playing field for women and girls in sport and active recreation across the state through the Change Our Game initiative. Sarah also has a background as the head of female engagement at cricket and also as a former investment banker, so brings quite a great commercial lens as well. Our next fantastic speaker is Craig Tiley. So you probably have seen Craig on the Australian Open many times, but Craig's the CEO of Tennis Australia and the Australian Open Tournament Director. He took over the reins at Tennis Australia in 2013 after almost a decade as the Director of Tennis. And under Craig's leadership, the Australian Open has gone from strength to strength over the past decade. Welcome, Craig. And finally, if our tech is going to cooperate with us, we have Alex Saundry joining us from afar. Alex is in London. What time is it there, Alex?
8:44 a.m.
Excellent. You're doing pretty well. We've got you up early. Very good. Apparently it's raining as well, which is sad for you. Sorry, it's pretty cold here too. So Alex, and I'm speaking to Alex quite casually and friendly because Alex is one of our former students, and it's really great to see her kicking a whole lot of great goals in women's sport. Alex is a leading figure in women's sport, and her experience both as an AFL player and a player manager separate her from the pack. She played for the GWS Giants and has since established More Than Management, an athlete management company that dedicates a lot of time and energy to helping our women athletes advance their careers and representing them across various sports. So thank you, Alex. Now I can sit down with everyone else. So we've got a series of questions this evening that I'll be running through. We're going to ask the panel to reflect on different questions, and then we'll provide you an opportunity towards the end to ask some questions from the audience as well, and there'll be microphones roving around. So the first thing obviously we want to reflect on is the broad issue we're here to talk about. So women's sport is more prominent than ever, but when it comes to providing opportunities for women to pursue a sporting career at the professional level with equal pay conditions and profile, we're falling well short. So my first question to the panel, and we'll take a volunteer on who wants to have the first go. How can we close the opportunity gap that currently exists between male and female athletes at various levels of sport? And what should the key priorities be now and into the future? Who'd like to kick us off?
Sarah's great with that answer.
Sarah, I think Sarah should set the tone.
I've heard her before.
Yeah, is that throwing under the bus?
I was thinking, how long do we have?
Yeah.
I think a big one that we talk about at the office is impact over busyness. And this is a really important thing because what has been wonderful, and I've had the great fortune to be working in this space for almost, I'm rounding up to 10 years, I will. There has been incredible progress, and it's really important. And sometimes you do have to remind yourself that there has been that progress, because it can sometimes weigh you down when you're like, oh God, but this, but this, but this. So this sense of how can we close that visibility gap, that opportunity gap, by focusing on the structures, like what is genuinely keeping this gap in there, and what are we going to do about it? Let's just get on with it. Let's stop talking about it. Let's just get on with it. Because sometimes I think there is a huge amount of good intention, but good intention doesn't automatically translate to something has permanently changed. The gap has closed. I have a hypothesis that if we genuinely looked at the investment that is going into men's and women's sport, despite the incredible gains that there has been, I have a theory that the gap is actually widening. That, you know, despite the investment, and particularly here in Victoria, we're so fortunate with how we are set up with the office, how we are empowered to drive change both through our programs as well as through our policy levers. But yeah, I think if you actually looked at the entire sector, the entire system, the entire way that corporate Australia is investing in sport, how all the different levels of government invest in sport, I really wouldn't be surprised if the investment gap is widening.
Well, that's a great way to start, Sarah. We're really on a positive
So this sense of, but it goes back to, well, what are we going to do about it? So for me, if I think about where we really want to focus at the office, we focus on leadership, we focus on participation, and we're focusing increasingly on that visibility. How do we close that visibility gap? And that goes to opportunity, that goes to media, that goes to corporate support, that goes to every single thing around it as well. So yeah, that's where we'll start.
But I think we've got to be real, right? We can't just sort of start idealistic. We have to start with where we're at and start to set those priorities. I don't know if, Rebecca, you want to sort of piggyback off that idea around the visibility or something similar in that space.
I remember about 10 years ago sitting in a sports conference, which in my role, to be a female, is very rare. So there was the 230 other men and the 3 females sitting in the room. But we had this great speaker who got up and really was trying to rally all the media executives and was like, let's just be really clear that female athletes are working from an inferior base. And I felt my back come up, like inferior. But what he wanted to say is an inferior base in that we've actively discriminated against them for centuries and prevented them from playing professional sports and stopped them. So there is no level playing field, right? And you can't ignore history. So if you want to make a change that there's two big themes that came out of it. You need to invest, you need to look at it as a proper investment, and you need to make prioritisation decisions. Because if you leave it to the free market, it's not going to flourish, right? So you need to be really active. And so those two themes come through in everything I look at. The investment, like any small business, like any new startup, you have to have a long-term view on it. And then the prioritisation piece, saying it's okay to prioritise it, but it's necessary. And the prioritisation part makes people really uncomfortable, because I hear all the time, why are the men subsidising the women, right? It comes up over and over again. But that prioritisation, like I said, it's okay, it's necessary. And then I see a couple of partners, so a few examples of partners who are doing it really well. Go back to 2015, we did a 10-year deal with the ICC, International Cricket Council. At that stage, of about 2 women's tournaments in 10 years, and all the rest of the men's tournaments. And during that time, all the broadcasters in the world got together to say this is just so wrong, and with the ICC changed, rewrote all the different contracts there. But it was a reprioritisation, right? So we all went from covering 10 matches of a women's match to all matches of the World Cups. There were more World Cups, more T20s. But what we did stop doing was televising and funding the men's qualifiers. And that was not popular, but it was the right decision. And then when we looked to CA, maybe in your time here, we did the same thing, right? Started investing in having 10 WBBL matches to all 59 of them. And the WBBL's flourished since then. Every single game, more camera angles, more specs. But there was a trade-off in that, and that was less coverage of the men's domestic. And again, it was unpopular. But if you look at the growth of the whole ecosystem, the sport as a whole has benefited so much from those priority decisions. So I think priority investment are sort of the two things that I think you need to have that mindset going into any sports decision and any media decision you make as well.
And someone's going to have to miss out somewhere to make room for what needs to change. Yeah, absolutely. Craig, did you want to reflect on that one?
Yeah, I can't talk about cricket, but maybe talk about tennis. I think both what Sarah and Rebecca said is probably, from tennis's perspective, and a little bit of learnings from that, what does and doesn't work. But it was over 50 years ago, the Open era, and the Open era is when women and men started to make money, and the men were making 12 times what the women were making at the time that started. And you all remember maybe the story of the original 9 and Billie Jean King and Judy Dalton, one of the Australians, and Kerry Melville Reid, the Australian, were in there and held up the dollar at the beginning of pro tennis. And then it was about 40 years ago that the US, they had a president, Marshall Happer, who Karen Scott Happer was married to Marshall, and she was a massive advocate for. He was president of the USTA and was a massive advocate for equal opportunity and equal pay. Equal opportunity didn't come unless everyone was paid the same, and that was her position. It was great. It was back 40 years ago. And I think there was some personal family commitment that was made. I was telling Andrea coming over in the car that Marshall had no choice but to drive equal pay for the men and women at the US Open 40 years ago. The Australian Open followed 5 years later, so 35 years ago. And there was a big argument around how can we pay the women the same. The men are playing 5 sets, the women are playing 3 sets. The women aren't in prime time, no one's interested in watching them. But to Rebecca's point and Sarah's point on the trade-offs too, a priority and the prioritisation, a priority was made that at the majors, the men and women were going to make the same amount of money. And that was going to be how the business model was going to be built. So a decision was made early that was going to be a priority, and since then it's flowed down to where it's not even a conversation really in our sport about what men get paid and what women get paid. It's what the entertainment is. And because even today, I still hear arguments today. You mentioned about taking away from the men for the women. Arguments today that the men on the court for longer, they should be paid more, the women on the court for less. But it doesn't really get any traction. And it gets traction more from people outside of the sport, but within the sport it doesn't get any traction because it's just really accepted. So I think the learnings that we took from that I would take from that today, which in providing opportunities for other sports and others, is that you have to start somewhere, and you have to have action, is what you said. So it could be a local club, an association, a state body, a national body. They decide that they're going to have an event or they're going to have an activity, and there's going to be an equal opportunity and there's going to be equal pay for men and women, and that's where we're going to start. And we're going to showcase that as a successful initiative, And that's going to be how it's going to grow. And unfortunately, I mentioned 50 years ago, it's a long journey. It's not one of those things that happens overnight, but it comes. This is probably the wrong room for that, because these people, you hear, are interested in this topic, but it comes for those people that are not in the room, to be in the local communities and to actually start that. And I get saddened and disappointed by the gap that exists. I was disappointed to hear your comment about it widening, because I think it's on us to not let that happen. I think the World Cup is going to make, the Soccer World Cup will give a big opportunity, but the fear I have, everything always finishes, and it was nice, it was fun, and then we're just back to the way we were. But
Yeah.
I know
We're going to keep an eye on that, hopefully not,
Yeah.
but we'll let you know. But I mean, what I've heard here is some consistency between this prioritisation and the need for the right leaders to be in the right place making decisions, and trying to make sure that sort of women or people, allies, like people in the room, are making those decisions to ensure that the prioritisation does occur. Yeah. Alex, we'll try and attempt the first digital effort. Any thoughts on actions that need to be prioritised in this space?
I think the three panelists have really kind of, knocked the nail on the head, to be honest. I really love Rebecca's comments around that prioritisation and making sure the platform's there, but some people do have to miss out in order to actually give room and space for the next generation or new sport or females to actually be given the platform. I think the key in it is that prioritisation, but at the same time, that visibility, giving females and gender diverse people the opportunity to have the platform to go to work and showcase their work. And as Craig said as well, being able to entertain. I think it's really important that there's that entertainment aspect in that, in all sports across everything, especially with the World Cup coming up. You see more content, more ads on TV, more sponsors, making the sport of football, soccer in this country more visible, which I think is fantastic, because when we think about football, we think automatically about Sam Kerr and the Matildas, but we do forget about the A-League women's, that's an amazing opportunity and competition. But unfortunately, at the moment, all our Australian young from 16 to 23, they're obsessed by getting overseas quickly, and that will really hurt our local national competition. That's a really strong competition, but there's this perception that overseas is better because the Premier League is the ultimate for them, which you can understand as an athlete. But for Australia's sport and entertainment, we need to make sure we harness and capture as many lives and hearts of the Australian nation to make sure these girls want to help grow and help leave a legacy in the football space here as well.
Yeah, great. And it sounds like we've got this diverse range of stakeholders. We've got sort of national bodies and events. We've got government, commercial, athlete management. Alex, I might stay with you there. What sorts of things in your work, what role can you play, actionable steps that you can take in your role to try and address that prioritisation or other areas of opportunities?
I think it was about 5 years ago when I worked in men's AFL management at a really big firm in Australia. And I left 5 years ago there to start More Than Management, which prioritises female and gender diverse athletes and media talent. And I think it's about also collaborating. Whilst we're separate entities, it's actually about collaborating with the men, trying to bring the men on the journey and them feeling, and trying to help them feel empowered as well through that process and that journey. But also giving the females and gender diverse people the voice to be able to be the role models and give them the seat at the table. I think for us, it's for us as a stakeholder in athlete management, we really try to help grow the profiles of our talent so they actually have the credibility which is sustainable across a number of years. It's not just a flash in the pan. So we work with them through career development, CV generation. Then we work through the contract negotiation process. So there's so much more from our perspective that goes into the female athletes, as they're mainly part-time at the moment. But you also have to see the benefit in that sometimes, and you give them the opportunity to go and, do media, do, great internships at Fox Sports, great internships at 3AW, but giving them access and giving them the ability to have a different platform. The ultimate goal is to not have them doing two jobs, but trying to find the positive in that and trying to help navigate that to make the league and industry stronger and harness more people with I guess I would say the weapons to help us, fight the battle to bring this pay gap smaller. But at the same time, it's that collaboration of administrators, athlete managers, clubs, leagues, which I do think lacks at times. I think that sometimes we can look like we're trying to not go against each other, but instead of probably collaborating, we look to each other as potential disadvantages in terms of trying to work together. So it's actually trying to help each other find the benefit in working together to, you know, help the athletes be the best versions. But to Craig's point, help the entertainment. How do we help the entertainment of the sport get better, which in turn will hopefully attract more viewers? And particularly with all this new innovation and technology coming in, it's going to be fantastic to see how we can change the game, particularly on Rebecca's standpoint on TV and through digital, to help us entertain better. So I think there's a level of collaboration, but I definitely think the athletes and the people who are on screen and playing the sport need to be part of that process. Absolutely.
Great. And so, Rebecca, thoughts on, from a sort of corporate sport / broadcasting lens, what sorts of actions need to be taken by those sort of stakeholder groups and yourself in that mix?
I think there's the obvious and important role that media has in ensuring that there's obviously equal coverage, and that goes to quality, quantity and tone. I feel that there's the three issues that we look at that we're not there on. Yeah, there's a very different tone in the way that it's often written about, the quantity is not there, and then quality. I also think, sorry, you might have to go.
Yeah. Yep. We might pass over to Craig or Sarah. Either want to jump in and bail us out?
I think I struggle a bit when I hear some of the conversations around women's sport in this sense of, you know, we've got to work on making it more entertaining or something. There's something here if we start to scratch the surface, and it was something that I really didn't become so aware of until I started working in the sector. I mean, we all come today with our own stories and where we came from, and for me, my version of my story is little country town, raised by a single mum. I went to my local high school that happened to be a trade school, and we did sport. That's what we did. There was literally nothing else to do in the town. But it means that a whole lot of things like girls don't play sport, girls don't do STEM, all this stuff, it just does not connect with my brain at all. Now, reality is there was a world around me that was shaping these things. Why did I play netball? Because girls did netball. And again, there was nothing else to do. But when I started to come into the role, so I joined Cricket Australia in 2014 and started to really dive into some of this research. I was approached to take on that role, funnily enough, nothing to do with women's sport originally. It was sort of just simply the engagement of women and girls in the sport of cricket, and particularly like women and girls playing. There was a very strong focus on participation, and women and girls as fans of men's sport. That was kind of the key connection points for me, because that was my connection points to sport. And I can remember when I came on board and started learning about this thing over here in the corner, which was the Australian women's cricket team that was 80 years old and had won more world championships than pretty much any other team in this country, and who they were and what they'd done. I'm like, what? And clearly, given what I now do, this was a really transformational moment for me and really started uncovering for me, getting to my point, really started uncovering for me, there is something in the psyche of this country that, one, we love sport. Sport moves the nation like nothing else does. But also we have extremely strong gender stereotypes in this country. Far more than perhaps people realise compared to other like-minded countries around the world. And we're seeing it still play out here. This sort of tone of condescension, this little sister patting on the head vibe that we still talk about women's sport, as opposed to these women are incredible. They are doing incredible things. You know, no one would ever contemplate thinking about, well, how do we make Serena Williams entertaining? Christ. So for me, this sense of how we break through the noise, and it's actually bigger than sport, but it's also something that sport can change more than I think anything else can. And so for me, when we think about the visibility gap, or we think about the investment gap, or whatever that might be, for me, it's actually so much more than, the women just aren't very good. That's bullshit.
So it's about taking it as seriously as it should be taken, and about valuing the amazing prowess and excellence of women.
Yeah, and that sense of, you know, why is it that, and, you know, we've obviously got an empty chair here right now, but, you know, why is it that we would have women's leagues in this country that outrate men's leagues, and yet the media rights for those men's leagues are worth more? It actually isn't based in rational thought. There's something else. There is an undertone to all of this. That's for me. That's what I really want to be unpicking.
Yeah.
And I mean, generally not like that's what we're going to do here. Like,
but maybe we can carry on with that. I mean, I know, Sarah, we've talked in the past about sort of your particular passion around the commercial value and potential of women's sport. Do you want to talk to us a bit about your perspectives on the potential value of women's sport from a commercial perspective and why it's important?
I think I was really fortunate that the sport that I was starting to do this work in, much like tennis is and much like a number of sports are, it is a really, like, there's very good intentions there. And so how we would start to talk about this is this idea of it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do. That was our easy way of saying it. Now, for the most part, I think this conversation has lived in it's the right thing to do. You know, gender equality is important. It is the right thing to do. And we still hear it when we hear women's sport spoken about through a CSR play or an ECG play. You know, you've got to support women's sport because, you know, for me, it's how do we actually get people to see the other side? How do we get to clear out the noise and have the conversation of, like the example I said before, where you've got a women's league that is outrating the men's league, why is that one being paid more? That doesn't make sense.
Yep.
And yet somehow we think that's acceptable, somehow that is accepted as normal. You know, for me, and what we're going to be really focusing on at the office in the next few months around the Women's World Cup, that is going to be the biggest women's sports event in history. Like, there's more than 1 million tickets on it, and that's happening here and across the Tasman. You know, that's so exciting, and I've got to, you know, I don't think people know what's coming in the best possible way. I have an almost 4-year-old, and as soon as tickets opened, I've bought us finals tickets. Didn't appreciate the match started at 8 p.m. at night when I booked those. So I've also got a hotel room right next to the stadium for when
contingency plan.
When there's the inevitable meltdown. But like we're going to be there. So for us at the office, the conversation that we're going to be trying to drive in the next couple of months is exactly that. Like, what is the payoff for particularly companies who are wanting to get involved with women's sport? We've been saying that this is like this rocket ship taking off, and we're going to start to talk about those companies who did get involved, how much they have benefited. And we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars of brand value. So how do we start to really build this sense of, yes, you know what, for some it might be a values-driven thing, and that's why you shouldn't ignore the fact that there is the right side of the equation as well. But the smart side of the equation, how do we just get people to see that? And you know what, if we're not getting buy-in there is a bigger conversation around why. And that for me connects into these gender stereotypes and this tension that we still do have in this country around just letting women be and let women be leaders and let women just simply be themselves. I remember one of the most impactful conversations I've had was with a couple of women leaders last year who were reflecting on their time, women leaders in sport, and they were reflecting on their time working overseas and just simply how different it was. In their other country, which happened to be New Zealand, they were just able to be leaders. In this country, they were still women leaders. There was still something else. They were still being othered. So, you know, for me, this is what's actually really exciting. I'm probably coming across as a bit depressing, but it's actually really exciting. Is
bipolar, maybe? You've got both angles of it.
How do we unpick this? How do we make the most of this? How do we remake what this looks like? Because we're not just remaking sport. We're actually remaking and lifting the bar of expectations in every single walk of life. You know, this is the world that our children are growing up in.
Yeah.
This is who they're looking at as heroes.
Yeah.
And up until relatively recently, every generation of Aussie kid was growing up only seeing men as heroes. That has a far bigger impact than simply what's the media rights of the AFL.
Yeah.
That is shaping who they are as people, what they value as people. So, yeah.
So feeding off that, and we'll just see how we go. We'll give you a test, little baby steps. How do we get more women's content in prime time where mass audiences are seeing it? How do we sort of shift that balance and drive content so that it's accessible and it's like the Big Bash in accessible formats and times for audiences, mass scale?
Primetime's such an interesting conversation because at a high level it seems obvious. Primetime, more eyeballs, more sponsors, it's going to be more successful. But you know, one of the reasons why, so we're the biggest broadcaster of women's sport. We do 4,700 hours and we do 23 competitions, but we have the luxury of having multiple channels. You know, we've got 8 Fox Sports channels, other sports channels that run on the platform, and then KO for those of you that use that.
Yep.
There's no limit really, to what you can do. So we're lucky that we're able to support that. And one of the reasons why Netball Australia came to us to ask for our support was their matches were at 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. on a Saturday, which is when everybody plays netball. But nobody else could facilitate them moving to prime time. So they said, if you could come and support us and we can move to 5 and 7 p.m. slots, we think this is going to be a real game changer. But what we found really, which is really interesting, was they're actually doubling their audience on delay and on VOD. And when we've dug into that, we'll talk a little bit more to audience demographics in a second, but netball is the only sport we have that is predominantly and significantly higher in females, right? The other female sports, as we'll get to, are actually still being watched by males, and this is a really important distinction. So when we've started to delve into this, why are so many people not watching in prime time? It's there. It came back to caring responsibilities. I'm caring for people, my children, between 5 and 7, and it does not suit me. Right? I do not have control of the remote in my house because historically we have watched football, right? So it's all these other society reasons where prime time wasn't the answer, and they were watching and they're engaged, they're sitting and they're watching the whole match, obviously when they've got silence and time there. And then this year we've been working through the NRLW and the AFLW draws, and it's been fascinating for us because we've got prime time, like it's there, it's available. But prime time doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to then have bigger audiences, because the biggest AFLW fans are AFL fans. The biggest NRLW fans are NRL fans. And we've got 72% of those people watching are males. So if you put them on against each other, you're diluting your audience. Then when we talk to the clubs, their facilities are such an issue. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had around change rooms. And I say, why don't you have this slot? Well, we can't do that because we don't have change rooms at that venue, or we want to be regional but we don't have the lights. So then you're not in prime time again. And then if you look at the resourcing of the clubs, they're like, we don't have enough staff to run these extra programs. So if we can have double headers, they are not curtain raisers, by the way, they are double headers, and either before or after, right, running into prime time. Maybe the men should shift early and the women should run into prime time because they've got clubs and resources. They're like, we don't have enough people to be running multiple venues and multiple times. We need everybody here, it keeps stadium costs down. So the question we're now having now is, it's not if it's prime time, it's like, what is the combination of all those factors that gets you maximum people at the match and maximum people at the ground?
Compatibility.
But change rooms are just my big takeout. That's been the stopper for so many different things where you can't have double headers, where you can't have consolidated things.
And I know that's something that the office has been quite focused on, about facilities and ensuring that women have somewhere to get changed and use the bathroom.
And for the most part, that's at a community level, but it's an interesting one when we think about it at the elite level. And it's also, a bigger is not always better. Like, I'm really enjoying hearing some of these stories because when I was at cricket, I was actually in the room in the opposite side. So I can remember the conversation where we were trying to get the executive and the state CEOs comfortable with the fact that we weren't going to be broadcasting domestic ODI cricket, which is not considered a fan-facing product, but we're trying to get that investment redirected straight over to investing in the WBBL broadcast. I can remember when we had double headers on at the MCG, and that was a really important achievement that many people around the game had been working on. And then here I am, the upshot that came and said we should be unwinding them, because actually we were having double headers, but because of staffing and because of requirements for how, you know, people had their union breaks and stuff, we had T20 games with like 3 hours in between, which meant that the women were playing to empty stadiums. And I can tell you the acoustics of the MCG are so wonderful. If you've got even like 5,000 people there and that's it, you can hear somebody have a conversation in the stands on the other side of the ground. You know, somebody's then tuning in to watch that. That doesn't look great. They're actually not judging how the athletes are going on the field. They're seeing everything else around. It's human nature. You're picking up all the symbols and they're saying, that's no good, I've disengaged. Yeah. It wasn't helpful actually having it there. It wasn't a great outcome. Now, if you could get the gap really, really short, particularly in the early years of the WBBL, that was great. You know, we were having 25,000 plus crowds because you could try and get it down. But then the time was right for that sport to separate. The double headers had served their purpose, and so you then saw the entire WBBL season pick up and shift. And so it shifted to its own window, which is now why it starts in October. And that chance, and now they're not the only one that starts in October. Obviously, AFLW is in there, and there's other leagues that sort of go into that space. But that sense of it having its own time to shine. And yeah, some of these conversations are not that dissimilar to the conversations that my team are having around what we call the Fair Access Policy Roadmap, which is how do you drive equality of access in community sport. And when we think about particularly scheduling, the main thing that we're saying to clubs is have the conversation, because the same may not actually be what your women want. And it's the same here as well. The same may not be what the women want. The same might not be what's best for the women's team. Might be, but not automatically.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to throw to Alex now and just get you to reflect, Alex, a bit on the work that you do with athletes. And we're particularly, I'm interested in how you actually help, I guess, work with the athletes to be advocates for themselves and to put themselves forward and feel sort of empowered to have those conversations about pay and conditions, because we're talking a lot about the higher level and what the media can do and what those stakeholders can do. But how do you work with athletes on that front?
I guess it's just making sure they feel like they can have a voice. Their voice is important and they've got a seat at the table. And it's the whole ethos of our business. I think the wording of when we used probably 5 years ago of calling it a bit of the sisterhood has definitely changed through society and what now. But I think it's banding together to actually give them the confidence and the ability to feel like they can have a voice and a seat at those tables about pay and conditions. But I think the biggest one for me, and, you know, we've seen netball and everything go through the news at the moment with, you know, the Players Association and Netball Australia going back and forth. But I think it's just like from my perspective, and I've spoken to a few of my netballers, it's just making sure they've got the information on both sides, why things would be good and why things wouldn't be good, and giving them differences of opinion and a conversation that they don't feel like they're going to be jarred or judged, to bounce things off as well from a business case study. AFLW to cricket is very different to netball. And I think that it's important that, you know, that they're able to have those conversations. About 6 months ago, we got athletes from our AFLW, from cricket, from our football and netball on a Zoom call together, and actually gave them a platform without us involved to share ideas and insights from different collective bargaining agreements in regards to how they do things, how they have conversations, and what they can do better. And they really enjoyed that conversation. It was really collaborative, but an environment where they felt safe to maybe ask the wrong questions, to maybe have the wrong answers. And I think in that was a great opportunity to give our athletes access, but also an understanding. You know, the AFL Players Association has a really long history as well with cricket, comparatively to netball and football, A-League women's in this country. So giving and sharing insights and information across codes, I think for us as a business, is we all need to help each other. So, you know, as an athlete manager in all those different sports, I take insights and inspiration from different contract negotiations and how sports do things differently in order to give our athletes the best opportunity to have the best contract and be the best version of themselves as a person and as an athlete. So for us, you know, for me, it's also giving that back to the athletes to make sure they have a voice, but at the end of the day, they have the right information and things are acted on merit and not emotion. And I think that as females and women, we get pinned up to say that we can be quite emotional in robust discussion. And emotion's not a bad thing. It's just how you tailor that. Emotion means you care and whatnot, but it's actually educating and helping them channel that emotion into really great ways in order to help them, I guess, get the seat at the table, but have the information to get the best outcome possible for each individual and then each sport respectively.
Terrific. All right, Craig, you're very quiet down the end there. I'm going to shoot a question your way, just get you back into the conversation. So you mentioned before, you actually talked through some of the sort of history around the major tournaments and gender pay parity. So can you talk to us a bit more about sort of tennis more broadly, how it's approached that? Does that filter down into other layers of the sport? What challenges are there? And I guess what could other sports learn from the experiences tennis has had in trying to get gender pay parity there?
Yeah, excuse me.
Do you want the water bottle?
Yeah, coming down.
No, thank you. I think Rebecca, you're passing something on. But actually, just to quickly, before I get to that, to build on what Rebecca and Sarah were saying, and Alex as well, is that I think at the end of the day, one of the things that moves the position fastest, ultimately we all know, we've said this before, is impact leadership. And when I look at the leaders across different sports in Australia, everyone's in a position where they can make a decision. You can make a decision on your investment in your national team for the women and your national team for the men. You can make a cricket decision today that you'll put the same amount of investment in the women's team nationally as you would into the men. We all can do that today. Every leader can do that today. There's nothing stopping a national sports leader from making that decision today when it comes to as a starting point to the national team. So maybe an interesting exercise would be go run through every sport nationally and see who is making the decision that they can, and we can talk to it in tennis a little bit because we made the decision early on the first day that the national team was getting $2.5 million on the men's side to travel around the world and the women were getting $500,000. The next day, it was even. It was a conversation with Pat Raft and Leighton Hewitt, to your point on conversations, and with Alicia Mollick and Sam Stozer. They were happy, and one of those two were okay.
Do we call that a good outcome, Craig? The gosh, who was it?
But it was a hard conversation. It was a hard journey for about a year and a half afterwards. But at the end of the day, so we run through the whole list of all the sports, the 80+ sports we have in Australia, is that the first answer will be, well, I don't have the resources. And well, you do have some resources. It just makes it, you've got to make a decision how you divide them. So for me, I don't understand why that's too much of a difficult decision because it can be done. Anyway, I don't get too off track in answer to your question.
No, that's really helpful.
I think what we've and again talking to tennis and without being an authority on other sports is that it is the sandwich effect. You know, at the top of it, we've got to create the aspirations because bringing new audiences to our sport, having young girls particularly have an aspirational vision into the future by seeing the best athletes participate in tennis and seeing it being completely neutral as far as where the focus is one of the things we pride ourselves on at the top level. And then at the grassroots level, at every club, the 2,500 clubs across Australia, is the number one priority that every one of those clubs have equal access, that there's never a question around change rooms or access to it. And the moment there is, we come in and we make a change. As a governing body, we make a change working with the state bodies on it. So I don't think, Andrew, I think now at this point, I don't think we have any facility across Australia that would be considered to be favouring one gender over the other because of the lack of facility on it. So again, that was a priority decision to make in the community environment. And then, and a lot of things we do, you know, one thing we are lucky in tennis is mixed doubles. We just launched, this is the first year we called it the United Cup, men and women playing on the same team. And interestingly, as inclusive as tennis is, it was still, we never really had men and women playing on the same team for an outcome that impacted the men's result at the end of the year and impacted women's results, both separately and together. So Australia's launched the first competition globally, and it is now the 5th biggest event outside the Grand Slams, with this $10 million in prize money. And we're going to lose probably about $30 million putting it on. So we're going to have to go and loan a lot of money. But the reason is we believe it's the right investment to make, and on this journey that we're going to take, it's going to be a great outcome. It's going to be men playing men singles, women playing women singles, and then they come together for the decider where they both play on the same team against the mixed doubles on the other team, where if, you know, in the case of Novak Djokovic, if he's to lose the mixed doubles and lose the match, he doesn't get what he's getting right now as being the number one player in the world. So I think things like that, those are decisions you can make. That's great for business. It's not a nice thing to do. It's great for business. And I think that's where we've, as a sport, just made some tough decisions early, both in the community, we at the club, or with associations. And believe me, we still have conversations around the table around, you know, I'll still have the conversation with someone that'll come up from a club and say, you know, why don't the men play why don't the women play at night after the men at 11 p.m. at night? And I say because not good for business. Yeah. You know, and I think you know, finding the list of priorities that every sport has to go through to make change, starting with things that are probably a bit easier to change, but holding the leadership to account on that will, in my view, move the dial the fastest.
I actually think Craig is revealing something that we've spoken about. I don't think you and I have ever had a chance to have a talk about this. One of the most powerful levers for change when we think about those sports, when we think about the idea of impact leadership, one of the biggest drivers for change in this space in recent years has been sport is an inherently competitive place.
That's right.
And these really prominent CEOs of particularly your traditionally male sports, no one wants to be last. And so one of the most powerful levers of change has been, and it's unfortunate because it doesn't matter how well crafted an argument you might have, nothing is as powerful as, oh, by the way, have you seen what they're doing over there?
Yeah, that's true.
And them over there, they're then putting it, oh, have you seen what they're doing over there? And that actually was this massive rising tide that particularly, you think, 2015 to 2019 in particular, it was wonderful. But these guys... Yeah, but those CEOs of, I'm thinking particularly the comp sports, your traditionally male sports, that's when they really started lifting their game.
Yeah, and how does that flow through, Sarah? Just the last question from me before we hand over to the audience for some questions. How does that flow through into community sport? We've talked a lot about commercial sport, we talked a lot about sort of opportunities for athletes at the top level, but we know a lot of this starts at the ground level, at the community level. What are some of the sort of, I guess, key priorities or steps that need to be put in place at community level to help attack this from two directions, I suppose?
Yep, yeah. So that's a massive focus for us. So in Victoria, we actually report to the Minister for Community Sport. That's how important it is down here. We've got a Minister for Community Sport as well as a Minister for Sport, which is more the professional end. So I touched on before the fact that we've got the Fair Access Policy Roadmap here in Victoria. It's the only place that something like this exists. We launched it last August. And that is actually working through local council, of which there's 79 in Victoria, to drive gender equitable outcomes for publicly owned community sports infrastructure, which is a mouthful, but pretty much if you've got a local footy oval and that has been funded through taxpayer dollars and that is a community asset, the fact that half the community is being blocked from using that asset does not make sense and is not something that we would ever be accepting in other walks of our life, and yet we do accept it here. So there's two things really. It's how do we rebuild the culture, the systems, the structures to make sure that doesn't happen. And those assets are, for the most part, managed by local councils. So we're connecting that with local councils and the requirement for them to have a plan with their ability to get funding from the state government. So if you want new ovals, new pavilions, you want upgrades, that funding comes from state government. This is what we're going to require you to be having and then be showing progress over time. So that's the single biggest piece of work that the office has at the moment. We've got a portion of our team that's dedicated to that, and just at the moment we're doing some workshops with the sports sector to get them to understand their side, because that then connects into, particularly where, again, you've got those traditionally male sports, it's about opportunity. So that opportunity comes from you needing to have critical mass and also the motivation and the right people to actually get these things going, and hopefully get them going in a way that's providing a really positive, inclusive, welcoming culture. I've got a 11-year-old niece in Bendigo who she hopes, I don't think it's been picked yet, is about to play for footy for Victoria for the second time. She was an underage player last year, and the first time there was ever a under-12s national competition. She went to Adelaide, she played, they happened to win. That's what she wants to do. And the fact that she can do that, and you've just got to hope and also work towards them having the right environment. Now, there is thousands, if not tens of thousands of ETAs across the state. So, how incredible is that going to then be? Not only for what does sport look like as these girls become older, what does the world look like for their brothers who've seen that equal standing in their own households? But that's also shaping them up to what does their life look like, What are their hopes and dreams, how do they see themselves and how do they see their place in the world. And that wider context is why I think this is so important. This is, as I said before, there is nothing that shapes this country like sport does. Some people love that, some people hate that. But that's why it's important. We're shaping far more than sport, and that's why there is ultimately that really great investment, which would be wonderful to see. And there is some really great initiatives in other states as well. New South Wales, they've got the Her Sport, Her Way strategy. You've got some really exciting news recently coming out of South Australia with their new Centre for Women's Sport. There is it happening in other states, but to see the level of commitment and investment that we're lucky enough to have here would be wonderful to see.
And I think we've sort of almost arrived right back at where we started around this word of prioritisation and around strategically making sure that this is a high priority, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's good business, because it's going to enable and build a system that's going to help us have the infrastructure that allows girls and women to succeed in future. So, all right, it's time to now hand over for some questions. We've had some hands shoot up. That's very encouraging. So what we've got is a roving mic. So when you receive the mic, go for it.
Thanks for the conversation, Mish Eastman from RMIT University. I'm really interested in the ecosystem around each of the panel members. So being an elite sports person is a limited few. Many of us would have aspired to that, but didn't quite meet the standard. So when we're talking about levelling the playing field, all of the roles and the business acumen around each of the sports, are we in a position yet, or are you tracking what the representation of females is in that domain? So if Craig, in Tennis Australia and or Tennis Worldwide, what's it looking like with regard to a range of all of the functional leaders in those sort of components? And I'd ask that of each of the panel members. It's not just the sports people who are amazing and excellent and inspire, but have very limited careers, often of only a few years in elite sport. It's all of the functions around the edges and thinking about if we have purposeful strategies that are making a difference with regard to lifting up people into business roles around that.
So Craig, did you want to kick us off?
Yes, so just to be clear, so the question is around opportunities for women in leadership roles, primarily in sport, yeah? And again, from tennis's perspective, I think, Andrew would know better, we're about, from a participation point of view in Australia, about split 50-50 more or less in the participation space. And the great news is, from a leadership point of view, it's about the same. We have, the great news is globally, which I'm very proud of because we've been driving it really for the last 9 years, but globally now around the Grand Slams, which are your major pillars of the sport, the leadership both in the chairs and the CEOs is predominantly female now. So whereas when I started 9 years ago, there was one woman out of the group of 12. So I think it's evolved, which is great, but also been purposefully evolved from the leadership at the top. But I think, it's as I said, I can only really talk about tennis, but there's still more to do. Because moving away from the traditional roles in leadership in sport, you can list which ones they are, to the ones that are not, are not traditional, is also a bit of a cultural thing I find in Australia. You have, this is the channel you go on, from a leadership point of view, versus, being the CEO or being the chief commercial officer, or that's not as common. So I think that's in major sports, that's what still needs to shift.
So it's a big focus for the office, but I've also had the great joy of seeing it play out as a system level as well. So if I think about it from the office's standpoint, I think I mentioned at the start, sort of for us, it's around leadership, participation, and that visibility gap. So we oversee more at a non-executive level the Balance the Board quota, which requires in Victoria for at least 40% representation of women on all boards. And the most recent quarter, we had 96% of funded sports who are meeting that benchmark, and the other 4% get to meet with us. So we're now thinking about then how do we support that executive piece. So we have programs where women can access certain opportunities, which is a really delicate balance because we also know the answer is not fixing the women because they're not broken. But we want to make sure that we are retaining them and they're not leaving because they are feeling like I'm not getting anywhere. Something I had the great joy in, Craig is being a little bit modest here, of seeing get built is also the Champions of Change sport group, which Craig was actually the host of the first ever group meeting back in 2015. And I was fortunate enough to be the implementation leader for cricket at the time. That's now 19 different sports and sporting organisations who meet quarterly to discuss women in leadership. They report publicly once a year. I'll be honest, I think a few of them are being a little bit polite on how they self-report. Rugby.
But one thing that's helped it now is you have the pay equity is the piece that's really, to the competition point, that's really driven some of the change, that you publicly disclose what your gap is and how you're progressing on that.
And they're also reporting, have I got better than last year or not? What's gone forward, what's gone back? But reality is we don't have enough women CEOs. That number is not really moving at a national level. When I stepped into this role and started looking at the data at a Victorian level, I was surprised it wasn't better. You're still looking at maybe 1 in 4.
And chairs.
And chairs.
And I think exec too, like I think it's the next layer down as well. Like unless you're looking in the HR or certain portfolios, you're still seeing males at the exec level as well.
You're certainly seeing some areas where you're more likely to see women, but in saying that, for some of the larger sports, that actually right now would be the CFO role as well. There's a lot of women in very large CFO roles in sport, but yeah, the marketing roles, the event management roles. People wouldn't know the Boxing Day test is pretty much universally put on by women. That happens to be, they do a lot of those roles. HR, flip side of that, high performance, practically a ghost town for women in senior coaching roles. And that is a big focus of the AIS and the Sports Commission as well. So, you know, we're still seeing some things here around, I think, what does a leader look like? But we're seeing change. I think about Jen Watt stepping in to be the CEO of North Melbourne, who had this really rich history in a number of very credible roles, very highly respected in AFL, and universally that was met with, what a great appointment was that. That's change. That's progress. That wouldn't have happened, and that didn't happen for the first woman who became an AFL CEO. No. It very much didn't happen for her. So, yeah, what I would like to see is probably 2 things. You know, how can sports be making sure they're consciously creating the pathways of women to move forward? But also, how do we open up the pathway for women who are having fantastic careers outside of sport who might have the interest and want to move across? I was really lucky that I was in my first corporate role at the time where I literally got a tap on the shoulder to sort of say, by the way, we happen to be looking for a female investment banker who's interested in sport. Would that happen to be you? And pretty much, it actually, the moment it happened was the first time I've ever spontaneously face-palmed because I'd started a new job that week.
That didn't last long.
So, you know, the idea of working in sport had actually been an interest in mine dating back to when I was a teenager. I'd gone down a very different path, and then that door had opened up for me. And that whole time I had wondered, wonder how you do that. You know, I'm sure I'm not the only one. So, you know, who are the next 100 women who might want to do that, who are actually ready to be stepping into executive roles, who, you know, if you think about some NSO roles, and particularly your state CEO roles, you don't have to work in sport before you come and do some of those. Reality is it's unlikely you're going to see Craig's successor have no background in sport. But for some of the other ones, you can go straight in there because it is managing a small business.
It's transferable skills.
There is very transferable skills.
Yeah, great.
So, you know, that's probably something that, you know, I wonder how we do that. How
and
do we
learn
open
from
up
other
those
sectors,
pathways?
learn from the way things are done in different areas and bring that into sport, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, looking out to the audience.
Can I just chime in on that?
Yep.
Because media's like the ideal between the sports and the media, 90% men every day. And I don't know another female that holds my role across the globe when we sit down at those functions. So representation is like the single biggest thing that media can change, in my view, to make the biggest difference. And you have to be really targeted in what you're doing. So we have you know, the fact that we broadcast more women's sports is no accident. Like, it's by design, and we like classify it as an investment because all our women's sports that we have rights to, we make available for free, freebies, right? So we're a subscription business. That makes no financial sense in the short term, but it's a long-term investment because we need to get more sports fans, and women's sport is the way to do it. So it's but it's an agreed strategy, right? That you have to get the whole business on. But we have problems with journalists, not enough female journalists, not enough producers, which is a key one because they're the storytelling, right?
Yep.
Different types of stories is key. On-air talent's always been one, and we've made huge progress in putting more females, not only on female sports, and started that. And that's been, like, when I look at progress, that's a huge marker, right, in the last sort of 6 to 7 years. But then the executives making those key decisions. So we have a program that's in, on, at. That's our strategy. More women on screens, both athletes and we have targets that sit around that. So what type of women's sports that we're showing, and then the on-air commentators, and then the workplace. So we've had permission to have a female-only graduate program. So we bring women in through to sit in non-traditional roles, like you talked about. It's in production, it's in journalism. My team assistant is an AFLW player, right? Because we wanted to trial and say, this is part of the AFLW work program. I want to learn from her all the challenges she's having in trying to be an athlete. Like, she just started pre-season training, so she is exhausted. We've had to change all her hours, right? Like, to just move around. So we're learning from that, and we've got a new voice in as well. But you need to be really targeted in all of those campaigns to make a difference, because if we were just going to wait for the pipeline to come through, it's not going to happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Terrific. All right, I'm just mindful of time. I want to make sure you get another drink and some food in before we go. Is there maybe one more question from the audience? I don't know if anyone has anything specific for Alex to get Alex back in, or a broader question from around the room. Any burning questions there?
Sure, thank you. Linda Gyorke from Allen and Clark Consulting. I wondered if you could, thank you to the panellists, really interesting conversation. I wondered if you could comment on safety for women in sport, because we haven't talked a lot about that. There have been some high profile reviews across a number of sports, and curious to hear your reflections on those.
Did you want to have a go at that, Alex? Is that throwing you
Yeah,
under the bus
I
too
guess
much?
no safety in regards to online abuse, or are we talking physical safety?
So Alex, just to repeat for you, that was whatever you feel more comfortable, probably the latter, which I think was the physical abuse more so. But
Yep.
Take it wherever you want to go with it, Alex.
I guess like abuse from a women's sport angle in general is every day of the week for them, from a social media aspect to also crowds and whatnot. But you're also seeing that across sport from males as well. One of the worst industries I've probably seen is jockeys. Some of the female jockeys that we manage, the abuse they get targeted within their inbox when somebody loses a bet or loses a quaddie or whatnot is horrible. And I think that just stems from, I guess, society and what's happening in society at the moment. And I think with society change, there'll be more respect for women. Our Watch is an amazing organisation that do great things in relation to, I guess, abuse against women. And Paddy Keensley, who's at Our Watch, is fantastic. It sits on the Carlton board, and Carlton have a Carlton Respects round as well that brings stories and also visibility to what they're doing there in terms of Carlton Respects and how they're trying to change society's knowledge, but also at the end of the day, society's actions. And I think that's really, really important. It's by storytelling and by giving insight into that we can change. But I probably speak more on the social media side of things comparatively to the physical safety of women's athletes. I think I'm really lucky to manage a lot of individuals that I don't think have ever felt physically, individually threatened in terms of in person, but definitely on social media, we've got a raft of different talent and different individuals that have been really heavily targeted online trolling and online abuse that, then leads to physical, leads to a sense of physical like safety in terms of they do feel unsafe in physical environments. But in terms of somebody actually confronting them in that space, I've never had an athlete in that regard, but I think it does stem from social media, that feeling of being unsafe in certain environments. But I think, that Meta and all those organizations are doing great things to put different tools and whatnot, and different organizations like the AFL, Tennis Australia, and whatnot are doing great things to help athletes and protect athletes more, and the individuals within those as well.
Terrific. Did anyone else want to chime in or on that particular question?
I think it would just be more a reflection that, probably two reflections. One, the importance of women and girls and men and boys being listened to. So when there are concerns raised, and I think particularly overseas, we've seen some extremely high profile examples where if people actually listened when concerns were raised, a whole lot of what came next would have been stopped. So how do we listen and not kind of dismiss or not just shuffle a person around or something like that? How do we listen? Due process is important, but as is listening. And I suppose the second one is more of a question for ourselves, where we do have women and girls over the last 5 to 10 years in particular going into sports where traditionally they had been actively excluded from. Are they going into those environments, and those environments are being set up in a really inclusive and welcoming manner? Or are we just 10 to 15 years away from all the reviews getting done on what people are experiencing right now? So how do we make sure wherever we can, to the best that we can, we're creating the environment for the first and minimising the chance of the second?
Yeah, and building that culture that supports that and enables that through leadership and through hard conversations as well. Fantastic. All right, well, thank you so much to our panel. We've heard some really sort of great insights, but from different perspectives, which I think has been valuable. Some of the things that I've sort of noted down, taking away really, is that idea of prioritisation and deciding to invest, really making those tough decisions early, as I think Craig highlighted earlier. Collaborating with men, I think that was a really important one, as well as not seeing men as the problem, but part of the solution along the way as well. How can we work collaboratively and towards better outcomes? And also some of Rebecca's points I found really interesting around rethinking this concept of prime time and around quality, quantity and tone of coverage, and how we start to shift norms and think differently about how we get women's sport messages and content out there to audience as well. So I would very much like to thank Craig, Sarah, Alex and Rebecca for your great insights this evening. So join me in thanking our panellists. That's it from me. I'll invite, I think, Melinda back to close up the ceremony. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. It's been a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Thank you so much. I guess what an interesting conversation, and thank you all for being so open and frank. You know, my takeaway is like number one, we're just about to have the biggest women's sporting event in the world ever here in this country. What a fantastic opportunity. Fantastic opportunity. Yep. And so get in amongst it. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to reflect on everything we've heard tonight around, one, the value in doing this, and you know, just the concept of the ecosystem and thinking long term. I mean, in some ways, these are, you know, when you're talking about elite sport, these are businesses, but they're also something that they're going to be here forever. These are things that people want to do, and so that vision to think long term and to actually you know, really address it in a way that's going to ensure its sustainability and its vibrancy is just so important. But I guess the final word for me is that so much of what you said is what I hear every day in talking about building inclusive workplaces and lifting gender equality within business. Like I just sat there and thought, yep, can't wait for the pipeline. Yep, got to build an inclusive workforce. Yep, got to have leadership. Yep, got to have people in different roles. You know, and it's just, so it is so much of the same message, but with, I think, the broader implications that come from the importance of sport in our society, and thinking about what it means to, you know, well-being broadly. So thank you so much for all of your insights and your honesty. As always, lots more going on at CEDA. This is one really important conversation. If you're interested in more of what we're doing, ceda.com.au, and please stay for a drink, and maybe if we huddle together we'll all get a little bit warmer.
Oh my
Thanks so much.
I feel my feet.
And I should say thanks to Deakin again. Thank you so much.